Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for October 25, 2022, the Crime Victim Status Edition. And we begin with that story as families of Boeing crash victims can challenge the U.S. settlement with Boeing of $2.5 billion because the court found that the loss of life from the 2 plane crashes was reasonably foreseeable consequence of Boeing's conspiracy to defraud the U.S., and that the families of those who died qualified as crime victims who could not only seek to have input into the settlement, but also seek compensation. So this is a huge blow to really, certainly Boeing and perhaps the DOJ as well. These victims' families had tried to persuade Merrick Garland that Trump administration DOJ sold them out by not giving them any input, and now the court has ruled that as well. So $2.5 billion paid by Boeing. 2 individuals escaped justice who were prosecuted individually. No criminal prosecutions against Boeing itself, so that might change. From the Wall Street Journal, in a press conference I watched today, Merrick Garland says the Chinese tried to obstruct the Huawei prosecution. It's not clear from the press conference, and this story comes to us from the Wall Street Journal. It's not clear whether they were doing it at the instruction and direction of Huawei, but the defendants were charged in a federal criminal complaint unsealed Monday in Brooklyn. The charging papers don't name Huawei, instead referring to an unnamed telecommunications company based in China. It's pretty clear he was talking about Huawei during the prepared remarks of his press conference. Western officials have accused Huawei of particularly notable threats by weaponizing Chinese government for cyber espionage, and this would seem to be one more example of that. So, pretty significant enforcement or prosecution. Back to our first story. This story comes to us from Reuters. The U.S. Justice Department has issued updated guidelines for victim and witness assistance after the government came under harsh criticism from the aforementioned families killed in 2 Boeing crashes. The same federal judge who ruled that they were crime victims must now decide on what remedy should be imposed. Their revised guidelines detail when and how department employees will work with victims and witnesses of crime to ensure their voices are heard and they are protected. And our final story is a lengthy article from Foreign Policy about the damage to U.S. foreign policy wrought by the Fat Leonard bribery scandal involving numerous U.S. Navy officers. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.